All right, welcome and thank you everyone for joining the Internet of Value Foundation New York, episode 89. And wow, man, so many people joined so quick today. Shellfish, Kashta, Rose, Dazzling, McQuack, Cork, and Crypto Queen. You guys, thank you for coming and starting off the space. I know the last few months or so we've taken it more of the an expansion on the technology side, and I'm saying more so for the recording at hand, right? Because we're going to be focusing more on distributed ledger technology and in particular the XRP ledger, from a basics to the developer standpoint over the course of the next maybe month or so. And so, the next probably 10 to 15 spaces I'm going to try and focus as much as I can on this. Anybody who's in the space now, if you have questions that aren't answered today, please bring them in the future. And if you guys want to come up and speak or type in the bottom right bubble anything specifically, please feel free to as well. But welcome, Shellfish, Dazzling, Kasha, Crypto Queen. Do you, any of you guys want to start us off, or anything on the top of your head that you'd like to start speaking about?
I just want to chime in and say that I'm appreciative of your, change in focus, at least temporarily. I know you'll probably go back and forth with different things at different times, but I think it's very apropos in the position that we're in the market cycle that we do kind of go back to the basics before we convolute things with too much other stuff. So, yeah, I'm just here listening in, and if I can help out in any way, I'll be available. But good stuff.
Thank you, Kasha, for coming, man, and for coming up and speaking. I planned on, and I already had this in my mind, about a month and a half from 2 months from now. I planned on focusing the spaces back on distributed ledger technology, especially because I believe Zahao and Evernote will be going live very soon after that time period. But this is a nice precursor that I feel like I've been inclined and pushed to do a little bit because of the most recent space information that I've been listening to over the course of the last couple of weeks. And Dazzling, please feel free, man, jump in.
Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Yeah, I just want to bounce off Cash to there as well. I know we've been deep diving into a lot of philosophy and space and all that kind of really fun stuff. But I was thinking actually last time I was in, I was like, oh, I wonder when we're going to do a DLT space. So yeah, it's really nice to kind of get a different perspective. So I appreciate being here and you sending the invite for sure.
Well, I appreciate you still coming, Dazzling.
So if I'm hearing you right, Jeff, based on what you just said, obviously there's a lot of confusion with the amendment process currently floating around our community. And it seems like based on what you just said, you feel like education will help clear up a lot of the confusion. So that's the spirit that you're in. I believe in you, what you're doing, and I'm hoping that this educational moment that you're providing for these people will give them some answers so they don't have to be confused around a lot of the noise that's floating around.
I couldn't agree more, Kasha. And for many, I think you could also use it as a reference point, right? It's one thing to say, here's this information that exists on, per se, the xrpledger.org. Go read it. This isn't how it is. It's another thing if you could just supply an audio file. I think it's sometimes more appetizing for others. So, just just more resources for others to have to be able to use educational wise, but also an excellent um, point that you kind of led to in this the voting, right? The amendments, which goes really to the backbone of the different structures that exist in these open source distributed ledger networks that we see today, right? The most part being proof of work, proof of stake, or a consensus based methodology. Now, proof of work for the most part, I know is it's more a repeat for everybody that's in the space today, right? The the agreement behind the transaction that is validated is fought over, and whoever produces this validation of transaction solving this mathematical equation is then rewarded the token, or essentially provides the security for the network validation to occur. Now, this could also pertain to an amendment vote when it comes down to, per se, the a change that would occur. Those who would have the most significant amount of, in this case, hash power, right, or power on the network that they were supplying to solve these mathematical equations, would have the most sway in choosing the direction. Not necessarily that everyone would have to follow, but if everyone does, in this most case, like using like a mining pool, for instance, just continue to use this particular mining pool that agrees to these changes and so forth, the network is changed by particular a few entities that may have the significant hash on the network. Also, cases in this case could cause a fork if participants disagree with the changes and they say we don't want these changes on the network, and we choose to stick with the original set of the network. This creates two different divided networks. In a proof of stake setting, the governance and security of the network is supplied by providing a proof of tokenized ownership, or a representation of. Sorry, Costa, I see your hand up. Go ahead, man. Jump in.
No, don't let the hand distract you. By all means, finish. I'm just going to come in when you kind of conclude.
Oh, thank you. All right, sorry. So in a proof of stake methodology, the governance and security is decided by those who have the most tokenized sway, or way. I meant to say sorry, in in the network. And so by purchasing the tokens or outright owning them, depending on how the production and the distribution of the token had occurred, particular actors will have more sway in the network, and this is what determines the ability for changes to be agreed upon. And in the same case, right, actors who may not agree upon these changes could also say, I don't agree with these changes, and fork away from the network. However, um, this is the same divided network kind of consequence, but the governance and power really being distributed, or yes, distributed between those who hold the largest supplies of the tokens. And then we have long-winded, but to this consensus model, this consensus methodology that the XRP ledger uses, and a few other networks today, like your HBAR, um, that uses a federated Byzantine consensus agreement to come to the validation of the agreement of transactions. Now, this is not based on who has more hash or has more tokens, but who trusts one another. And so it is completely trust based. For you to, per se, make a change on the network, you you have to come to an agreement with all of the other distributed trust members of your particular network to allow this change to occur. And through this trust mechanism, we have this overlapping of certain members who are trusted by a significant amount of the members making the validation on the network. This is what we have in this case called the UNL. This unique node list is the specific number of members that have the largest trust and the ability to make the changes, or weigh the largest significance of the changes that occur on the network. This is what the XRP ledger uses, and a few other consensus networks, like I mentioned. And Kashta, please feel free to jump in now.
Great stuff. So you covered the basics very well. Three different, basically, kind of predominant methods that all have different governance structures. I just wanted you to kind of back up a little bit, and I may ask a series of questions here. But if you could just start off explaining to people the repository aspect of this, and where all of the entry points to new code exist for each of these chains, right? And could you cover that?
Yeah, because it's very important too when we talk about decentralization. as many networks, and we all really like to say, right, the network itself could be have members agreeing to participate in a decentralized manner. But this repository, this GitHub, where if you were to say, I want to go and look at the open source code of the Bitcoin ledger or the XRP ledger, which I will also add a caveat to, very interesting that Microsoft actually owns GitHub. But um, uh, there are only certain members who have the keys to actually change the code on the repositories. I think in Bitcoin's case, it's like 6 members. Ethereum, I'm not actually sure how many. I don't think it's very many. The XRP ledger, it's I think it's like 7 or 8 members at this moment in time who have the keys to be able to alter the code. And so, this being one very significant, somewhat centralized aspect to all of these actual networks that exist today, when it comes to the the significant adoption of the code actually being implemented into the open source code. However, anybody can go on any GitHub that's open to amendment changes and actually produce code that can then be verified by all the members who are looking at that GitHub code, particularly the validators or anybody who would be an operator who wants to make changes on the XRP ledger, and they can then go and say, let's update this. This is really great code that we can put in there. And so, that also being a huge aspect to the open source nature of it, with the ability that everybody can participate in code changes.
So I noticed you used the word somewhat centralized, and I know that may inspire questions from the audience. So, can you elaborate on why you use the terminology somewhat centralized? And yeah, I'll continue from there.
Yeah, because it's like this. If so, say in the instance, I'll use the members of the XRP ledger key. If all 6 of them or all 8 of them were to die in the same month, well, the code will never be able to necessarily be updated on the open source GitHub. And so then this question comes into it: if we were to copy and paste all of the code and then change that repository, and then have all of the nodes and network take code from this new repository, you'd have to call it XRP Ledger 2 or something, right? XRP Ledger, not dead version. Um, is that still the XRP Ledger? It's a huge question that would be thrown up. And so I say somewhat centralized because it's not that it's like gatekeepers necessarily, but it's like there are members and still humans that are needed to be able to update the open source code that exists.
Okay. So if I could just spin that a little different way to kind of simplify it for people, to my understanding, no one owns the blockchain. And so why we use this terminology of no one owning it is because it is potentially open source in nature. So anyone can pick up the code and use it, right? So that's what allows it to be operable literally by anybody, right? When it comes to this repository, my understanding is it's not centralized, at least the repository is, and I'm talking about in context of the ledger, doesn't become centralized because ultimately, if you are of the mindset that you wanted to see other rules in the ecosystem, you could essentially put it in your own repository. And then what you have is a choice that needs to be made by other validators and the community at large, which chain that they want to then authorize as the legitimate chain moving forward. So although one person can own their repository, anybody could actually have their repository, and as other node people either trust that repository and that version of the chain is how we actually reach decentralization. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and to even make it better, another example is, right, some of the changes that were made on Bitcoin, when they added the, oh man, how did I just blank on the word? What was the update 2 years ago? Um,
Taproot?
Taproot, thank you. Not all of the nodes that are running on Bitcoin are running the Taproot software, but are still participating in the network. And it's like this interesting thing, like, just because you run different code doesn't necessarily mean that you'd have to be kicked off the network. That would have to be like a network decision where they wrote it in the code that said if you were writing different code that you'd have to be kicked off, and depending on what that code necessarily was, almost like how we have, I guess, a couple different node operations that it could exist on the XRP ledger. So yeah, I love the point you made.
Selfish.
So I was just curious. So the 7 or 8 key holders that you were saying, are they included in the UNL list, or are those separate entities from it?
I think you broke up a little bit for me at first. If you could just repeat that.
Okay, so I was asking you. You have 36 UNL validators or operators, and then you said there's only 6 or 7 key holders that can change the actual code. If I'm understanding this right, are those of the UNL list, or are those entities separate from the UNL list?
Yeah, listening to my own words, better term is update the code from the stance that everyone who wants to use that open source code will be able to have easy access to it. But yeah, so one would be Ripple in this case. Richard Holland is one. XRP Ledger Foundation. There are a couple other people that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I know it's a little bit more distributed than the keys that are like if you think of Bitcoin, right? But it's still, I think it's sufficiently decentralized there, and you could also, from this standpoint of like actuators who accept code, and they're going to be good repository holders, right? Like any code that's ever been voted on and agreed upon has been updated, right? And so there's that's like another thing you could think about it is like that they're essentially just the people who have to hit the buttons that say, okay, updated, this code is now open source as part of this network.
Aslan.
So I still don't understand why there's a difference between a UNL and a DUNL, right? Or the default unique node list. Can somebody try and break that down for me, please? Why there is a difference between the two? Or is it the same thing?
No, so this comes to the trusted party and lists of this trusted party. So in this case, the default list is basically you trusting a list of validator nodes that the XRP Ledger Foundation has published that they trust. And so it just becomes the default list because it gives you the option when you install the initial Rippled software, right, to just use these trusted validators that are part of the XRP ledger already. But it does not mean you have to use them. It's just why the term, because the terminology technically default node list is more of like a semantical, where the unique node list is more of like a technical.
Yeah, if I could just kind of chime in on that real quick. So, Desmond, the 35 validators that make up what we call the UNL are validators who have all trusted those other 34 members, right? We also have like 100 other validators, right? So the default UNL that you're referring is just kind of pointing to that list is saying, as Ripple or XRP Ledger, these are the 35 validators that we trust. The reason why it's a little bit fluid is because let's just say hypothetically, of those 100 other validators, all 100 of them had 2 extra validators that they all trusted outside of the 35 that had their list, right? Now the would recognize that overlap of those other 2 validators and could potentially view those additional 2 as UNL members because they're trusted by a majority of other node or validator operators. So I hope that kind of makes some sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I threw a thumbs down, and I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. It's meant to be a thumbs up. So with this list, right? It's from what I can gather, it's a list that Ripple have proposed, right? So what's stopping anyone else from creating their own list and all the validators going, okay, let's go with that list instead? Why does it always have to be Ripple's list?
It doesn't have to be Ripple's list. They just put out one as a recommendation because they're kind of the hub that has the ability to curate, from these validators what their equipment is like, et cetera, to establish some trust. But anybody could put out a list. The constraints, though, is all of these lists have to have an 80% overlap or you fall out of sync. And if you fall out of sync, the ledger kind of halts, right? And so we don't want that to happen. So you don't want too many people making different lists so that all of those lists don't at least contain that 80% overlap. Like it's fine if you have 100 different lists as long as they all have an 80% consistency overlap. And then it's work. If you have one that has 70%, another one has 50%, you got a problem. So you just need to maintain that 80% overlap and you can have as many lists as possible.
I think you answered Max's question also with that. He had asked a question to me. Um, I'm down there. It was actually perfectly timed. Um, yeah, and just to that point, it's not even Ripple's list. I guess I would call it anymore. It's been adopted by the as the XRP Ledger's default list, XRP Ledger Foundation's default list, I should say. Sorry, and you don't have to use it, but you do risk the chance of forking away if you do not have that overlap, just like Kashta mentioned beforehand. And this is where it comes down to this trust, right? From this 35, if I know the network consists of another 132 or so nodes that are at least trusted by those 35 who are helping participate in the consensus, and even farther out, I think there's, if I'm not mistaken, it's like something like 800 nodes of that pertain to the entire network, right? But yeah, but these essentially this 152 that really are making up a lot of the validation power. It doesn't make sense if I am part of the 35 and I see that there's 5 of the 135 that have updated their code. If I am to update and force the changes on the code base and the amendments change and they're not running the same XRP ledger software anymore, they fork away. This could be very detrimental to the network. And so, one of the reasons from a consensus-based trust network, just because the code's ready doesn't mean you want to update either. You have to make sure that everybody is on board so you do not risk the factor of having half the network just fork away, and the validation transaction speed. I mean, there's a lot of things that become questionable if you have half the network go down. And Chris, welcome up, man. I'm glad you came to the space.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I'm just frantically DMing a couple of other devs to see if I can get some more to come and join in on this. I caught the tail end of what you were talking about with regards to the repository ownership. What I caught you say is wrong, but I want to double check first before I actually try and explain. So I'm just trying to see if I can get a couple of other devs that are actually involved in some of the Ripple D stuff to join. The point you were making around decentralization versus centralization is really key, and we just need to be 100% sure that we're accurate. So I'm doing my best to see if I can get someone to join. While I wait to see whether anyone is going to join, you were talking about GitHub, right? So I would caveat everything I'm about to say with I'm waiting for someone just to DM me back to say yay. But my understanding is that when you said that there were a few people that have the ability to push code changes, okay? When you're talking about Git, anybody can fork the code and take it off on their own repository, right? But there is ultimately a repository owner, okay? Anyone really can then, off that fork, they can make a change to that code. Now, bear in mind, they're changing a copy of the original code, so they are changing the RippleD instance. And then you can do something called a pull request, where you can essentially submit a change to the original source repo. Okay, this is a relatively common software pattern, but somebody ultimately has to accept that change can be included into the code base. Now, it gets more
Exactly.
complicated because you get various branches, and there are different policies that can be set up. But ultimately, it's going to ultimately make its way into the main branch before it goes live. And what I'm just waiting for confirmation from is who actually has control of the Ripple D repo, because you said Richard Holland has access, and what I am not convinced Richard Holland has got administrative access to that repo,
Ooh,
because
I would love if you found that out. I so personally myself, I've overheard in a conversation that made it seem like such, but you could very well be right about that.
well, I want to try and clarify, because it would be useful information. I would like clarification, because I've always been under the impression that that repo is ultimately gated by Ripple, or by Ripple employees, I should say. If somebody like Richard Holland is included in that, then that's actually really a lot better than I thought it was. However, I don't believe that to be the case, but I'm desperately trying to get confirmation of that. So, like I say, what I've said so far, let's just caveat it with I'm trying to find out the exact details.
Yeah. So the truth is Richard did have merge permissions, and when the repository was transferred from the XRPLF, Richard and VC. So the branch permissions are 2 reviewers per merge, and when it was transferred over, Richard and VC merged something, and then Elliot freaked out, and Nick B freaked out, and then I believe both Richard and VC said, we are not going to merge anything anymore. You can either take us off as administrators. So that's what happened. I don't know if they're still on there. It's hard. I don't believe that publicly you can view branch permissions, but I do know it's 2 reviews per merge. So,
Oh, Dennis, I love you
for a pull
so much
request.
for coming up.
what's that?
For a pull request,
Yes.
then. So it's
for a pull request.
Yeah, to merge down.
And there are, with branch permissions, you can, in GitHub, you can allow people to have access to bypass those permissions. But you can't, nobody can look and see. Like, I can't, Elliot and then another administrator would be the only ones who can actually tell us who has the permission to bypass. Or even if anybody does, it might be that it's not set up like that. There's a lot of flexibility with branch permissions. So,
absolutely.
But wait, Dennis.
That's the point I was making. Is that the master branch, or the main branch, is ultimately what makes its way. That's ultimately what matters. Branches can be changed, but it's what gets into that main branch and what ends up in production, and that to me is the key. And so therefore this conversation was around control of the updating of the core code. So ultimately, whoever is the gatekeeper of pull requests to that master branch controls what code can go live. So it doesn't matter who makes the change, or what pull requests are made. Ultimately, the answer to the question is, which it sounds like we don't know, whoever has the administrative rights to accept the pull request to the main branch is the ultimate gatekeeper of the actual amendments.
Yeah, Chris, I just want to say one thing for people that this may confuse, is that you started off saying that there could be multiple repositories. So when you're speaking now, we're speaking only in the context of Ripple's repository. And I think that's a very important distinction, right? Because I know a lot of people are hearing this thing like, well, we could end up with a fork. And I just think that people even get confused by this notion of a fork. So
Yeah.
I just want to kind of get the question out there
I will
that
attempt to
even
clarify that, Castor. Let me clarify that then, because the term fork, right, is regularly used in software development It's a common thing when you fork a repository. It's totally different to forking a blockchain. Okay, so forking is quite normal. All that really means is you can either clone a repository or you can fork it. And the difference is you clone it down onto your local machine, or you can fork it to your own repository, essentially your own account. And then you've got a duplicate copy of the code. Now, when you've got that duplicate copy of the code, you can make a few changes. Okay, and as long as you don't divert too much, that's where a pull request come in. You can submit a change back and request that the change gets re-included. And so when we say fork in this context, we're not talking about forking the chain or going in a different direction. Anybody can go and fork the Ripple code. You can just go and like any repository. So you can go onto GitHub and you can just have your own account on GitHub, and you can just essentially make a copy of it if you want to. It's not going to do anything for you. It's not going to give you anything. You can't affect the ledger. You're just going to have a copy of the code on your own repository. That's all it really means.
Thank you for that, Chris. Now, one other question in case people are wondering this. Let's say in a hypothetical situation, you do end up with two versions of the ledger in an actual hard fork of the ultimate chain, right? To the people who may be questioning this, which chain then becomes the valid chain, if anybody was wondering that question?
The ones
Got
that the exchanges accept.
And
yeah,
so
the
it
one
becomes
that
semantic at that point, and it's truly and from an exchange standpoint, this is something that maybe they, from a business standpoint, enjoy. Like, oh, okay, who's in charge of making these changes to the chain? You want to be XRP? Give us something, kind of thing. I could very well see that. It's not a scenario that we would want to be in from a network standpoint.
Yeah, I think Dennis' answer was great because it illustrates an important point. It's not as if you end up in a fork situation just because hypothetically Ripple is on one side of the fork and the community is on another side of the fork. Ultimately, it kind of comes down to how many people move in what direction, right? So we've already said we got 35 UNL members, we got another 115 other validators and multiple nodes. If 90% of all of those validators are basically pointing their nodes to that newer version, right? And most of the community is saying we're going to participate in buying this newer version because we really didn't want this strange change that Ripple is trying to force on us. Then actuality, it is the chain that the people decide in consensus that becomes the valid chain, and Ripple forks off into an isolated environment. And I just wanted to make that clear because just because they're this big behemoth, right, doesn't necessarily mean in a situation if for some strange reason we end up with two versions, that their version is somehow more legitimate than our version or another version.
Yeah,
the
you
thing
made
is,
valid,
Kasta, you are
Kasha, you made
actually
valid points
you
there. But when it comes down to the valid chain, I think that the question is which chain becomes more profitable if you're an investor in the chain, right? And then that answer would be whatever the exchanges happen. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the valid chain, right? Because it's not the way XRP was designed. It's really not designed for all these layers on top of it, right? Most people want to, imagine a world that XRP runs smart contract capabilities, but the real basic, nuance to this is that it's made primarily for payments. It's a payments chain, and that's why they never looked at, what Ethereum was, even though those opportunities represented itself when Vitalik pushed it and presented to the Ripple board that this is what he's trying to do, right? So again, it's not a valid chain. It just becomes a useless chain if the community does have a second version of this stuff, because I don't see the community ever driving it to a point where it can compete technologically as well as liquidity as an Ethereum or even an Avalanche for that matter. And there's not a lot of things happening in Avalanche, right? So again,
No, I hear what you're saying, Ghost. I'm trying my best to keep the space on purely just technicals. Like I really love that we went over not only the XRP ledger, but we hit like GitHub technicals there for a lot. And so I know it was a little higher on the totem pole for educational wise, but if anybody who
Jeff,
wants to go back to that for
Jeff,
like GitHub information, then that was
would you
incredible.
mind,
Chris,
Jeff,
you
right? If I
yeah,
just want
go
to
ahead.
I just want to clarify something, right? Because these spaces, I mean, I'm delighted to sit here all night and talk technical stuff, right? However, we need to talk about stuff that is relevant, okay? And it's very important that we don't allow the conversation to go into areas that aren't relevant. And I don't think anybody has ever mentioned forking the chain. This AMM stuff has nothing to do with forking. There's not going to be a fork as a result of this. You know, this is just an absolute storm in a teacup. This whole thing has been blown out of all proportion by a handful of people that are basically just too trigger happy. If we all just sit back and wait, this thing is going to run its course naturally, and it'll all get sorted out. I genuinely think that we have to be careful that we don't start a conversation about forking the network when that's not something that's ever been mentioned as so I'm nervous about being involved in a space where we're talking about something that's not even on the cards. That's all.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't see there any future where we'd have the. Ooh, gosh, I think you're rugging. You sound like a robot. I'm sorry.
Anyway,
Yeah,
I basically
you can talk about
Gosh,
Pastor,
I
nobody
don't know
can
if you
hear
can
you.
hear me, but you're a robot.
Anyway, Jeff, I just wanted to say that I'm delighted that I messaged Dennis, and Dennis has jumped on the space to sort of like answer any of these questions around the Ripple D stuff. And he's probably the most qualified person I can see in this room to answer any of these questions. So while he's here, if you want to get into anything technical, you're not going to find somebody much more qualified than Dennis to answer the questions for you.
You already know, Chris. We're definitely gonna dig in as long as you have some time, Dennis. We'll definitely dig in a minute here. Crypto Red Eye, you've had your hand up, and then Vet, and then if Kashta, you come back and you hear us, you please feel free to jump in after.
Yeah, I just had one quick question. Where's the default list obtained? XRPL or does it come with Ripple D? Both? Yeah.
So I am pretty sure when you would install your node and the Ripple Deed software, it gives you the option to use the default node list, or if you would like to create your own list. And so typically, unless you obviously already have people that you want to trust and don't want to use the default node list, which could cause you issues if there's not at least an 80% overlap on trusted nodes that are part of the network. So you could provide some sort of validation. That's why typically people would just go starting off with the default.
Awesome. Thank you, and thank you for the space.
Oh, thank you for coming, man. Vet, please go ahead, man. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, I have a question for Dennis. Dennis, why is it the case that I think all repos are streamed by Ripple? Shouldn't it be maybe more suitable for? I mean, of course, you probably don't know maybe the reason. I don't know, but what do you think? Basically, why is it not from the XRP Foundation? Because I see always that it is from. Let me see. The URL is it's always a Ripple URL basically that is streaming the Ripple D software. When we download it. So I'm. Oh, did you drop? He dropped, right?
Might have dropped, yeah.
All right, then I'm done.
Let me see if he's still in the space. Let me see if I can invite him back up. Oh, he's back.
This app is terrible. So Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah, here
Cool.
it's really acting up for me
I
as
can
well
hear
right
you.
now.
Yeah, it wasn't working on desktop. So it was managed by the foundation. If you guys remember, there was this big thing about moving XRPLD or Ripple D from Ripple to the foundation. And that occurred, and the foundation is made up. VT is the like president, and there's a bunch of other members, and Richard is the top developer. And Richard and Vitzi pushed through one or two amendments with two reviews done by both of them that they wanted to see in the repository, and they Ripple freaked out. Ripple lost it, and at that point, Richard and Vitzi said, "We're not going to do anything anymore. It's yours. You guys are going to manage this. We can put it in XRP or XRPLF, but we don't want to deal with this." Is pretty much what happened. So I mean,
So
yeah,
Dennis, it was changed to XRPL Foundation,
yeah,
right? So even the stream of Ripple did download an update, for example. But then when the incident happened, it was changed back to Ripple, basically.
Oh, I mean,
Because
you
I
mean
remember something.
like from a depackage point of view?
Exactly, like when it get built and you can download, So when we wait until it's built and you just can download the new.
Yeah, I think that's always been Ripple. I don't ever think that. I mean, I don't know. You'd have to like where are the servers at? Like literally, I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know if I don't think Daniel runs that. That would actually be a good question for Ripple. I don't really mess with the package manager.
Daniel from Foundation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, he would be
Yeah,
the only
not
other one
yeah.
who would have information on whether or not they're actually packaging the binary.
Yeah, because when you download it, it's like the URL, it's
Yeah,
repos.ripple.com.
but that's just
Yeah,
I mean, that server can be anywhere. That could just be a
right.
Cloudflare reverse proxy. So I don't know who actually owns that server, but I do believe it's still Ripple.
Yeah, I think so too.
But the key question really is not who owns the server; it's who has the permission to ultimately approve the code and build the binaries.
Right, and that would be I would say that's Elliot would be the number one person. I have not seen another person merge code directly in since Richard and Vitzi and the XRPLF.
But isn't the XRPL Foundation also admin? So they probably, like Barath, for example, they probably they know who has keys, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I mean, and you
but
can look.
yeah.
I'll look. I think you can see some of that. So.
But this does go exactly to the point that you were all talking about as I joined the space, which was around. It was specifically a point I think Cash was making around centralization, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say that the XRPL ledger is properly is decentralized. The structure, the nodes, the way it's all set out is decentralized. But when you have ultimately got a single party controlling what can actually become a change on the network, and it is one single party, that's probably the last piece that needs to be ultimately decentralized more. Now, you can't have 35 people all determining what goes on, not practically, but I don't think having one is equally good either. I think that we have to try and slowly move to a situation where there needs to be a slightly broader consensus of at least more than one entity controlling that. And I think that's probably the last thing that needs to get resolved to be able to say that the XRPL is truly decentralized.
Well,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead, Dennis.
Oh, well, I was going to say you can't tell. It's impossible to tell, but it is owned by the XRPLF, and VT is the owner of that, which means he would have a higher level than anyone else, but they're not. None of those permissions are shown, so it's impossible from a repository standpoint to tell who is actually an admin. So nobody knows. I would just say Elliot's the only guy I've ever seen do it other than VT and Richard.
and before that maybe somebody else. So
yeah, and the drift I got is not like they don't have access to it. It's like they're like, and it's almost like this trust, going back to this trust foundation that we have in the notes, right? Like, all right, I know that pissed you off, so you know what? I'm not going to do it anymore because we have a trust basis already, right? Like I didn't have it before. I'm not going to ruin the relationship right now, and so a kind of, but that was the point I was trying to make before, Chris, because it's like from this network perspective to then you look at like a GitHub code bit where the code actually exists in the open source setting. It's like the networks themselves, in my opinion, are sufficiently decentralized, whether it be your Bitcoin or your XRP ledger, right? In this case, and manner, there, but the code itself is still in all cases, right, for every repository there's just a few people, and just like you said, if there's 35 people, man, you're gonna have a difficult time ever, especially depending on how many multi-sigs you need, keys to agree upon the change to be pushed. I mean, gosh, I couldn't imagine it.
But that is fine, right? Because that is fine. I think Kashta was mentioning this. Why is it fine? Because if you are okay with it, you just roll with it. You trust them. If you're not okay with them, then you have to go your own way, of course. You cannot blame the whole network not to go your way, basically. I think this is what people always also say, like, oh, it's not decentralization and something, and then you ask why. Oh, because I cannot pull the whole network into my direction. Well, duh. It's like, yeah.
No, that's a very important point, Vet, and that's what I was really saying. Like decentralization at its core means that no one can enforce rules on another participant. Like that is the whole core of decentralization, right? So at the end of the day, your remedy to not have rules forced upon you is literally to be able to have your own repository, your own version of that code. Like Chris kept saying, well, you could change the code a little bit. What if your version of the code is just leaving it the same because somebody else is trying to change it? You're just leaving the XRP ledger as is and saying this is the version that we want to continue with. Somebody else is trying to change it, and then now everybody needs to decide whether they want to change or do they want the constant thing that has been the same. But I 100% agree with you, Vet, and that's really the point I think really needs to be understood here.
I think I just want to add one final thing because I know there's other people with hands up. The point around this is this fundamentally goes back to whether or not who pushes the code creates a centralization within the entire network. And if the person that pushes the code pushes a change into the binaries and the validators choose that they don't want it, right, it effectively nullifies that power. So on the one hand, it actually does no harm if one person is ultimately gatekeeping that repository. However, where it is a problem is if another entity wants a change and they can't even get that change pushed into the code to be voted upon, that becomes a centralization problem. No
No, it
individual.
doesn't, Chris. And I think this is the real dilemma. It doesn't make it centralized. That's the whole point I'm trying to make here. Because the insinuation that you're making is that somehow, because we're all on this voluntary participating network, that you somehow have entitlement to my repository. And I think that that's just erroneous.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand the point you're making, Cash. All I'm trying to say is that if the point of decentralization is that it should be the wider community, and when I say community, I'm talking about the validators who ultimately are the gatekeepers as to what actually goes live on the live network itself. If a person wanted a change, right, anybody has the right to try and make a change to the network. It's no
But
guarantee.
that's not how the network is designed, Chris, and for a good reason. And this is really what I want to dig down deeper into. Like your option to hold on. What I'm saying is your option to then say, let's just boil it down using examples, and I hope everybody bears with me. They're not intentional. But you got Ripple on one side, and you have XRP Labs on the other side. XRP Labs is the one that's saying, I want to push this change, but you, Ripple, are blocking the repository, right? This is the scenario that you're painting here. Am I following along so far?
As long as we're saying this is hypothetical, then yeah.
You're right, hypothetical. So what I'm saying in this event is XRP Labs is not entitled to Ripple's repository. If they really believe in the chain, just like we saw with them essentially spinning up the Zaha network, all they would have to do is fork the repository, put the change in their version of the code base. And then what happens at that point is every other validator has a choice of whether I'm going to point my node invalidator at this version or whether I'm going to point it at Ripple's version. And that is really the nature of the decentralization. You're never entitled to Ripple's repository.
It's not Ripple's repository. It's
Yes, it is.
XRPLF
Yeah,
ultimately owns
it's
the
technically
repository.
XRPLF, and
So
VT and
here's
Richard could have merged in hooks. The problem isn't the merge, it's the reviews. We weren't getting reviews, and we want reviews from Ripple because they are also the best developers for this. So
Yeah.
just to be clear, VT's the owner of the VT, not VT, the XRPLF owns the repository 100%, has 100% access to push in anything. So it was never a problem of us not getting hooks merged in. It was us not getting reviews, which feels like you don't give a crap about what we're doing. To be clear.
Yeah, I know, but you took it back to the literal scenario, and all I'm trying to make is a literal point about the repository. So if you change what I said, even if you change it to XRP Ledger Foundation and put X potential person promoting a change on the other side, the dynamics are the same. And all it does is changes to say that no one is entitled to the XRP Ledger Foundation's repository, right? If you're so insistent that you want to change, your only option then at that point is to fork the repository, put up your change, and then encourage somebody to point their nodes and validators at your version. That is decentralization at its best.
Yes. I mean, the thing is, Kashi, you're not wrong, right? You're not wrong. But what you're doing is you're creating a scenario where we will end up with the nightmare that Bitcoin has gone through with a cash version and a BSV version and a gold version. Well, we don't want that. That's not what we want ultimately, and we don't need it. If there is consensus that says that you should be able to put forth an amendment and the validators ultimately make the decision of whether or not it goes live,
but there
then
wasn't consensus.
no,
Problem is
yeah,
there
that's
wasn't
fine.
consensus.
That's fine because that's the role of the validators. If I
No, so
put
what do you do so when you're designing a network and you know that there's a potential for you not to have consensus, what are you designing in the event that you don't have a consensus and someone's insisting upon a change?
they
Right?
can't
You
have
have
the
to
change,
build these networks for all scenarios.
but they can't have the change then, can they? That's the point at which you do genuinely end up having to go and effectively create a fork of the network.
Yeah, but see,
that's the thing.
the problem, in my opinion, is that the role of validators is just seen differently by people, and I think we have seen this also with David's comment. People just see it differently. Some people see them as governance, okay, like they ultimately decide. Some other people say, well, they actually just coordinate, the activation. So they're different opinions, and they're all valid. I mean, that's like I'm more on the governance part. Okay, I see it as a governance. Some people see it maybe they're just activating stuff, and that's it. They have no other purpose. And for I mean, to see that we have to acknowledge that Ripple has also an opinion in that sense, right? And it might very well be, and I'm just hypothetically, I have no idea, of course, that they are maybe not happy with it or whatever, for whatever reason. I don't care, okay? And of course, as Dennis was saying, they could push this through, right? Or Weetzy, because the owner pushing this through, they could have done this because they have the rights. It's also XRP Foundation's repo. They have also the permissions, whatever, okay? But the forking part goes both ways, right? So if we have said that, hey, if you are not happy right now with the situation, you just fork away. People who are right now in the place and see changes happening, they could also fork away. And in my opinion, it would be probably the most likely scenario if, let's say, we do something here we all together do something here that Ripple is not happy with. They would probably fork away. Okay, they do their own stuff, and then it becomes basically the original question we had, like what is the main chain? And I think this is the reality and the difficult part here, where we say, hey, we want to keep as many people as possible on the same page, and that means we have to do, I guess, a compromise or something, and figure out something else. That is, I think, the most likely outcome in these things. I mean, they are what they are. They are tactical, and they are sometimes not nice. The outcome in terms of forking away, as you said, that Chris, that you don't like that.
I don't like it, and
outcome. Yeah.
I think it's not good for the community. I think it would be a really bad thing. And when I see what happened with Bitcoin, I wouldn't want that for the XRP ledger. And so what it comes back to is, I agree with you that I see the role of the validator is a form. It's a form of governance. It's a form of checks and balance. It's a form of last line of defense to ensure that the code that goes live is suitable at a technical level. It's so to my mind, if the validators decide that they don't think a code update is appropriate, it won't go live. Doesn't matter who has ultimately created that. The point I was making is, if a single entity can determine to stop an amendment ever being able to be discussed and even getting to the point of a vote, that to me is a form of centralization and censorship. And if you can accept that validators are playing that role of governance, it's not for the person controlling the repo to make that choice. It's ultimately for the validators. And I suppose that's what the heart of the question: who ultimately controls what goes live on the ledger? And if it's a decentralized ledger, it shouldn't be any one individual entity.
Look, I'm someone who's looking at these things realistic. I'm not saying, hey, we are so far on the right side of decentralization, if it's a scale from left to right, in that sense. I'm just seeing, I think it's just a realistic. I mean, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ripple has just major stake in this network. Okay, they have a lot on the line in this network. If you look at the tokens and whatnot, so that they have you could say, why do they have an equal proportion of say? But it seems just from my eyes, they have an equal proportion of basically their stake on the network also in the say. But what I'm seeing as well is it is reducing. Okay, like over time, where in the beginning it was maybe only them, it's reducing over time. And let's not forget, it seems that people are also fine with it. Like the whole network, whole exchanges, everybody is okay with it. Like they follow that. If people would not be okay with it and start doing their own thing, and that becomes successful, it could become the main chain. I mean, honestly, Zaho, okay, it could become the next main chain. Quite honest, from a I guess theoretical perspective, 100%. You cannot exclude this. Like, people would say, "Oh, this is crazy." It's not, okay, because we just said, if you're not happy, or if people aren't happy with what's going on with the main chain, you do your own, and you just hope that people gonna maybe come over or whatever. It's just a dynamic, and at the end, it's just you serve the network and what people want. If this is what people want, they will speak 100%.
I love you, man, and I love your optimism with some of this stuff. But to say how could potentially become the main chain, it's almost sacrilegious, my man. I mean,
Yeah,
Well,
but
if somebody has
theoretically,
their hands up, let those
Yeah,
people
thank you,
who
Dennis.
have questions speak, man.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Dazzling man, go ahead, and Larry Bear.
Sweet. No, thanks. No, this is a really, really cool conversation. But I just kind of wanted to reset for a second. Just ask a really nice, easy question for Dennis, because I noticed, Dennis, that you were streaming some of your workflow on Twitch quite a while ago. And when I caught that stream, it was really nice to just kind of watch your workflow. It's really nice to see someone of your caliber and education level to kind of run around the desktop and do all that. And for someone like me at my level, that's really nice to watch. So I do appreciate that. But and any other devs that because I know there's security concerns and stuff with stuff you're working on, so there's certain things you couldn't stream and things like that. But if any other devs would be willing to do something else like that, that would be really cool for someone like me. But yeah, are you gonna look at doing anything like that again soon?
Yeah, you know what? Obviously, thank you for the compliments. I actually, the reason I was doing it was because pretty much the same thing you just described. When I started getting into VR AR, I was watching a streamer, Dilmer, and he was just really opening up, like walking through, like he would make mistakes in GitHub, and it was really just kind of cool to like see his flow as you described it. So that's what got me going with it. I did sort of slow down because I actively work in a repo that's private, and just sharing and hiding things has become obsessive. But I appreciate the reminder, and I will try to stream some more. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and so thank you, and I will definitely try.
Nice, yeah, I definitely appreciate that, and I know there's a lot of other people in here that would appreciate that too. But I'm going to drop Death because I'm going to go to work. But thanks, man. This conversation is great. Keep it going.
Thank you very much for coming, Dazzling.
I came in late, so is this a current issue or is this a historic issue?
No issue. Really just
I meant the
education.
timeline on this conflict.
There's no conflict.
What the conflict?
No, the
Yeah.
thing about the foundation didn't sign off, didn't get reviews. Ripple did a release, didn't do a release. That conversation, is that a now or is that something that's in the past? That's all I'm trying to figure out first.
It happened in the past.
Gotcha.
And so there's no current. I mean, even I would say there's no real current issue.
It's in the past.
I would say
that's all I wanted to establish.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, beautiful. So my follow-up question to that is this a case where, because of this lack of review submission argument, where the foundation ordered something, but Ripple did not comply by releasing it? Or is it a case where Ripple released something that the foundation didn't approve? Which one are we dealing with?
So
Actually, Larry, we were having a broader discussion on governance. He was having a more technical space here, and we were just talking about governance and started using examples of governance scenarios. So we're not talking about any particular issue at all.
Okay, gotcha. So you were just talking about the basic give and take between the two groups and how each one has different governance opportunities, responsibilities, and policy tools.
Right, possibilities and scenarios, and really just going over the architectural backbone of how things get changed and who participates in these changes.
I got it. And I would just say my only comment on that is I did think when I saw that, I don't know if it was fake or real, when I saw that ad picture that went up a few days ago that was from the foundation, whether it was real or not.
That was real.
My thought was, oh, that's nice. They've got a budget, so they have to.
That was 1 year ago.
Okay, I didn't know. I didn't know real, old. I didn't know. First I knew they ever ran an ad. Okay, but the point is to run an ad, you have to have an ad budget. You have to be administrating. You have to.
It could have been also by Ripple.
Oh, was placed by Ripple in actuality? Is that what you said?
Could have been.
Could have been. Got it. Okay. I took it as, since that was the name, it came from them, and I thought, oh, that's good. They've exercised some power, having a separate budget to run some ads as part of their need to get messages out as part of governance. And I just thought that was a good thing. That was so I figured over time that those relationships would have to shift organically as Ripple goes more to market and as the XRPL matures.
Thank you, Larry. Go ahead, Chris.
I just wanted to just say that we should probably stop drawing a line between the two. It's not a case of us and them. Ripple are probably the biggest supporter of the XRPLF. I mean, the vast majority of the money that the XRPLF have came from Ripple. And the reason the XRPLF exists is because basically a group of people approached Ripple and said we should do this, and Ripple supported it, and basically Ripple helped to make it happen. So that's right. We don't know how that ad appeared. It quite very well likely was Ripple that probably did pay for it. We don't know, and to my mind, it's not. It's a bit of a. I've noticed over the last sort of 6 months a slow move towards an us and them type narrative, and it's not real. It's been created for no reason. You're not going to find. There will always be contention and there will always be issues, and that's fine. That's all part of a good process. But there is no sort of like us and them situation. I was at Apex, and not only did I watch the all the keynotes from Ripple and from XRPLF, and they were both extremely supportive of each other. I spoke to the people individually afterwards, and there was no us and them. It is very much a very supportive relationship. So I just get a little bit fearful sometimes when we hear the narrative of us and them, because it's just genuinely not true. Ripple genuinely are supportive of the XRPLF. They gave them, I don't know how many millions of dollars it was, but it was millions of dollars to get going.
Yeah, great point, Chris. And I'll take the hit for that one. I tried to stress that I was only using it in a hypothetical. I should have been aware that it was going to kind of run out of control to that kind of dynamics. But yeah, that's why we really started out talking about consensus in the context of all three of the different blockchains, right? It wasn't just in the XRP situation. So even if we were talking about Bitcoin, like I guess the point that I'm still making is like, although it's not the ideal situation to end up in conflict, sometimes it's just unavoidable when you're evolving and maturating, right? So you never know what the future is going to bring. And I'm just saying we have to be appreciative of the fact that even in that scenario for Bitcoin, that is the most accepted decentralized network, they still had a private repository that can't anybody just put code to, right? The option for people who wanted a different Bitcoin was to run another version of Bitcoin and convince somebody that that version of Bitcoin was better than the version of Bitcoin that was in that repository that they didn't allow somebody to then have access to. So I guess I know I'm kind of being persistent on going back to that dynamics, but I do think it's very important.
But the dynamics is different, Kashta, with XRP and Bitcoin, right? You still have a reward system that's coming out from Bitcoin as far as mining, right? And you can argue Ethereum has the staking rewards. That dynamic is different for XRP because there is no such thing, right? So at the end of the day, as we can argue about whether XRP and there's a divide in this, we have to be honest to the fact that Ripple has a significant amount of power. And Vet said, well, if there's some clashes, there could be a compromise. No, there isn't a compromise because at the end of the day, Ripple calls the shots, right? Because if they go,
I tell you, wait, goes. I tell you why there would be a compromise, and it's actually very important. For Ripple to pull out of all of this is difficult. Why? Because they committed to decentralization, right? So if you pull out, you have to explain now everybody why you're now pulling out. So this is why when people say what would happen in a clash or something, I said the path downward is very dark because it's not good. And it would be for both sides really bad, okay, like for us and for them.
but let's put that scenario in play, right? If they pull out, if they said to their client base, right, for all the institutions that they've been working with, we've come out with a new direction with regards to this, and we'll call it XRP plus plus, whatever they want to call it, right? And we're not now going to use this as a payment, and we're going to test it with you extensively, right? At that point, what do you think happens, right? I mean, we still have as a how, that's fine. You can argue that work is still getting done there, but funding completely dries out in that sense, correct? I mean, so what happens is that you get a separation between which investment do I now want to be a part of? Do I believe that
but this is the point, this is the point goes. And I guess this is also maybe the sad part, and hopefully, maybe never, but hopefully we do transition to it is not only Ripple, because you mentioned this very well. So people are, when they look at XRP, they look at Ripple. I mean, that it is what it is. So when Ripple says, hey, we are now here or here, whatever it is, people go there who are buying, let's say, XRP for the purpose of Ripple. Okay, I mean that's obvious. But if you are, for the sake of the network and all of this, then it would be much difficult, right? Let's say we have more entities like Ripple in the future, like as big. It doesn't become as obvious then anymore, right? If just one of them would say, hey, I'm going whatever route, because you have many more Ripples, so to speak. And I hope actually we're going to end up in that situation, because it would make the main chain much more fork resistant, actually, in that sense.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking y'all are making some very dangerous assumptions here, because if we boil this down to the actual flows of money and who's actually buying XRP, there is a likelihood that a lot of this, number one, is trading activity. And they don't give two shits about Ripple. They're looking at the available liquidity and the volatility in the market. A lot of this is struggling nations who are using the asset as a hedge. So just to think that somehow Ripple is this gorilla that just bully over the XRP ledger and the asset, I think is a dangerous assumption. I think ultimately, like, people are looking at where is the liquidity, where is the volume at, how robust is the ledger, and if the community are providing that infrastructure, I don't think the market would ultimately care. It just has to be safe, secure, distributed, and full of participants, right? I think if you put Ripple in an isolated environment, just because they're Ripple, they become JP Morgan and they lose and we win. And I don't want to make this a Ripple and us situation, but I'm just hearing this and I just think that it's dangerous, because I see this totally different than y'all do.
Kasha, I agree
yeah,
with you to
I
a
agree,
point,
Kasha.
right? Kasha, I agree with you. But the thing is, with this scenario, right? You sort of see what's happening within this space itself. There's plenty of project that has the gusto and the technical knowledge and the right people that can lead these projects, right? Some even better with regards to how security and all these things are sort of scored. But at the end of the day, these projects don't survive or don't see the light of day. They need the funding to sustain that development, right? And we can argue that yes, we're not going through the scenario that we go split ways. But if it goes that way, you have to go where the money is, and you can't ignore the gorilla in the room, right? You can have these other
Ghost,
projects that are better, but
the money is 1.5 billion in daily volume. It's not the treasury that Ripple's sitting on. That's what I'm trying to get you to
yeah,
understand.
daily
Like,
volume.
that's where
But
the
when you
money is.
split that, Kashta, 100%, that a significant of that daily volume will be going to where Ripple calls the shots. Right? We can argue that all the community will
That is
drive it. It
false. That
doesn't
is
drive.
false. That is false.
Oh
And we
my
need to
goodness!
change the
Come
subject,
on.
but that's
Yeah,
false.
There's
please,
They're
no
please,
wait. So you're
1% of the
telling me
market
that
activity, and we know.
you're telling me that a four.
sorry, Ghost. I hate hitting that button, especially because I love you. But once again, man, I'm trying to keep it just technical stuff today. You know, not really trying to politicize or create scenarios of possibilities behind the actual monetary means of, say, a project or running validators or anything. Just the technical aspects of the changes that could be made and the participants making these changes. So I do really love and I appreciate you coming to the space though, but I have to close up in like 15 minutes. Chris, you got your hand up, and Karma, I want to get to the questions and see what you guys have to say, and maybe go over just one little last aspect of the XRP Ledger Validator consensus, and I'll close up after that. But go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so there is an element of this which hasn't even been mentioned yet, and that's sidechain architecture. Because with the sidechain architecture, it provides an alternative option, which is a much less sort of like doomsday BTC fork type scenario. Okay, so I mean, for me, the main purpose of a sidechain is to deliberately put a different form of functionality onto a sidechain, but it is also an alternate version. If you do end up in that scenario where Cash described, the last thing anybody should want is a fork of the XRPL, just because you can't get a change live. Sidechains allow you to essentially achieve that without differentiating from the main ecosystem itself. And I truly believe we're going to see significantly more sidechains over the next 5 years with different use cases. I think that's actually the path to success. I think the main chain will be predominantly dominated by Ripple's use case. I think it'll be a significant source of liquidity, and I think the side chains will feed off of that, and it will all be one big significant ecosystem. So side chains are a great thing, and I think that Zaha will be the first, but it absolutely will definitely not be the last.
Great stuff.
I agree, Chris. And Karma, welcome up, man. And then go ahead, Mikkel.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I just have one question because I said this and I want to make sure I'm not wrong. It's my understanding that if I run a validator and I want to make an amendment proposal, I don't have to ask or talk to anybody. That doesn't mean it's going to get voted in. They might just ignore it. But I can just put a proposal out, right? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
make one on Git.
you can. Yeah, you could run a validator. You could make your amendment in GitHub. You could fork the repo, make the amendment in GitHub, make sure you add that amendment in. Then you can vote your own amendment in and run your validator with a similar UNL list, but you would yourself create a fork in the network. And so you wouldn't be validating the same transactions. And that would end up forking your network. But you could try it, you could do it, but yeah, you could also do
That's
all of what you said and not enable it, and then continue your validations and not fork, but have your amendment be sitting in your queue or whatever. But again, it wouldn't be enabled, it wouldn't do anything.
That's a funny one, but
In short, Karma, you get bottleneck at the repository. We had this conversation earlier, but I know he's trying to close up, so I'm trying to give you the short answer. You get bottlenecked at the repository, so you have to have somebody with the keys to then give you access to put it in. And yeah, in short.
Mikkel, welcome to the space, man. Thank you for coming up, and please feel free to jump in.
Oh yeah, no problem. I was just gonna say I agreed with everything Chris was saying about side chains and how important they can be, and that was honestly one of my disappointments with the Zauhao network, just because it really didn't feel like a side chain; it felt like a separate chain, especially with the one-way bridge and the separate token on that chain. But I completely agree with everything he was saying about side chains. It just doesn't seem like the Zauhao network really fits into that architecture that he was describing because of the lack of functionality between the two chains and how that degrades over time. So that was my only thought, but I'm really excited for a world where if things can't be done on the XRP ledger, you kind of have seamless side chains that interoperate, and then all the abilities that need to be exported to side chains can be done so in a seamless fashion. I just kind of push back a little bit on the Zauhao being that thing. To me, it just seems like a completely separate chain that's going to extract some value from the XRP ledger in the beginning.
I don't know if I would say extract value, but I would say it has the highest potential to be an interoperable side chain. And why do I say that? Because it has the exact same code base. I think it's like, what is it, like 80% of the code, 85% of the code is that of the XRP ledger. And so if we were to build say these witness servers, it would be much easier for an XRP ledger chain to communicate with an XRP ledger chain, C++ code, really basically to C++ code, rather than an EVM side chain where there's this question goes into who's going to play the custodial agent. Now, if that gets say knocked out in regulation, Mikkel, where we have clear rules of the road, who plays the custodian, who's able to provide this support for you to hand your asset over and have another representation of it on another network, and this in an international setting. Yeah, I think the amount of different types of sidechains that could exist and how quickly Zahao could easily then become a sidechain in the theoretical sense of how you're kind of expecting it to look, I think becomes much larger of a possibility. Chris, you got your hand up, man. Go ahead, and then I am gonna close up right after.
I just
Right.
want to say real quick, Darth Ranger. That's exactly kind of the scenario I would love to see. Not everything. I keep bringing up that idea because that architecture, right, for me, kind of seems like the holy grail to how. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I would just add then that it is a really complicated conversation and a really difficult one to sort of say. Zahao is touted as a side chain, but without the ability to transfer the native asset backwards and forwards, that puts a grey sort of like cloud over that. I think what Death said is basically the bottom line. I mean the X-pop solution is actually, in my opinion, genius, and I understand the reasons why there's concern around it from a technical perspective, but it is such a better solution than witness servers. It's just a shame that I don't see that we're likely to ever see the way back. That said, when Death said that if we get regulatory clarity that would enable these witness servers to function in a way that was, legally secure, then I don't see any reason why at that point Zahao wouldn't potentially have that option available to them. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the reason the whole Xbox thing came about was not because they were trying to come up with an alternative for fun. I don't think they wanted to get into the legal issues of having to run witness servers. I think that ultimately is what drove their decision to come up with an alternative solution. And I think if that legal stuff was to get resolved, it would shine a different light potentially on this. But ultimately, whether they have the ability to move XRP backwards and forwards, technically it's now going to be XAU anyway. So I think that they are still going to be able to ultimately prove the most important point, which is that the XRPL ledger can exist in its own right on another network with the shared common functionality, but with additional augmented functionality. That's the future. And I think we will resolve this issue of the asset in the months and years to come.
Thank you very much, Chris. And today we skimmed over, I should say, proof of work, proof of stake, and we really hit it home with this consensus-based methodology, this trust modeling architecture behind not only networks, but I would say today was a prime example of in real world consensus, right? Not everyone in this space agreed upon what was being talked about. However, we're all participants who want the better of the network, the XRP ledger. This is exactly how these nodes and node operators come into contact and trust into this validation of the system and how it grows. And so, I think everybody who came to the space and came up and spoke today, it was a great amount of information. This is just the start. I'm going to be doing this a month and a half, 2 months if it needs be. I know Zahao and Evernode will be going live in the time period after that, and so I want to focus a lot on those networks when they go live. But I'm going to be doing as much XRP Ledger education over the next course of the month. I host spaces Monday, Tuesday, and Thursdays, 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. Please, anybody who's in the space or who listens to this in the future, if you want to come into the space, if you have questions, any of the people who are speakers today, especially myself, Vet, Kashta, I mean, all Chris, we're all Dennis part of this community, and we try to answer questions as much as we can to the greatest knowledge that we have of them. I'm a little upset I didn't get to ask you a million questions, Dennis. I always love asking you a million questions, so I do hope that you have time to maybe come back sometime this week. But still, once again, I thank everybody for coming today, and I love everyone, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the night.
Great stuff. Thank you, man.
No, thank you for helping me co-host, Kashta. Not everyone.
Go side chains.